I have buried two people I loved with my own hands, and I never once cried over either grave. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest, because it matters. I am not a soft man. I am not a kind man. I am a man who learned a long time ago that the mountain does not care whether you live, and that wanting things only makes the wanting hurt worse. So when I tell you I spent $20 on a December morning, $20 I needed for flour and lead and a new axe head before the snow closed the pass, and that I spent it on a woman the whole town swore was cursed, you are going to think I had gone simple from too many winters alone. Maybe I had. But here is the part nobody in that town knew, the part I didn't know either, standing there in the freezing mud with my hands still warm from the coins. I thought I was saving her. I had it backwards. She was the one who'd come to save me. The auctioneer was a fat man with a voice like a rusted hinge, and he was selling her like she was a heifer with a bad leg. "Now this one," he said, and he had the gall to take her by the chin and turn her face toward the crowd. "This one don't talk, don't argue, don't sass, don't nag. You men ever wished your wife came that quiet?" The crowd laughed. I remember the laugh more than anything. It came up out of 40 throats at once, that wet, easy town laughter, and it hung in the cold air like steam off a dung pile. She didn't laugh. She didn't flinch either, which is what I noticed. She stood on that wagon bed with her chin still caught in the man's dirty fingers, and she looked out over all of us with eyes the color of creek ice, and there was nothing in them. Not fear, not shame, nothing a person could grab hold of, like she'd packed herself up and gone somewhere else and left only the body standing in the cold. I had come down off the mountain that morning for supplies, that is the whole of it. 11 miles down through the first real snow of the season, Biscuit picking her way along the switchbacks with her ears laid flat because she hates the cold worse than I do, and the whole time I was running my list in my head the way I do. Flour, 50 pounds, lead, an axe head because I'd cracked mine splitting a frozen elm, salt, coffee if there was money. There is always a list. I keep it written in a little ledger I carry in my breast pocket, a habit my Martha gave me. God rest her, because she said a man who counts his things at least knows what he's lost. I had no business in that square at all. But the crowd had gathered, and a crowd in a dying mountain town in December is a strange and powerful thing, and I let myself get pulled into the back of it the way you'll stop to look at a wreck on the road even when you'd rather not. I asked the fellow next to me what was happening. He was an old-timer, tobacco-stained, missing most of his teeth. "Hutchins' girl," he said, like that explained it. When I didn't say anything he spat and tried again. "The cursed one. Whole family burned up in their cabin 2 winters back. Ma, pa, the little ones. She walked out without a mark on her. Folks say that ain't natural." "Folks say a lot of things," I said. He squinted at me. "You that trapper, Crane, live up past the tree line?" "I do." "Then you know about being talked about," he said, and grinned with his 3 teeth. And I'll admit it landed somewhere soft, because he was right and I hated that he was right. They'd had her, I learned, working the back of the boarding house for 2 years. Cooking, scrubbing, hauling. The widow who ran the place had died in the autumn and the bank had taken the building, and nobody wanted to feed a cursed girl through a winter for free, and so here she was. Property by default. Property nobody had ever signed for. Being sold by a town that wanted to be rid of her the way you'd want to be rid of a stray that kept turning up at your door, reminding you that you were the kind of person who wouldn't feed it. "Do I hear $1?" the auctioneer said. "A grown woman, strong, healthy, broad in the shoulder for the work. Do I hear $1 to take a burden off this fine community?" A man up front, I knew the look of him without knowing his name, the wet lips, the way his hands stayed in his pockets, said, "What's she good for if she won't talk back?" A man likes a little conversation. And the way he said conversation made the laugh come up again, but lower this time, dirtier, and I watched the woman on the wagon and I saw it. Just for a second, the ice in her eyes cracked. Underneath, it was something I knew the exact shape of because I'd seen it in the mirror more times than I'd like to count. It wasn't fear. Fear is hot. This was the other thing. The cold thing. The thing that comes after you've stopped expecting anyone to come. And my mouth opened up on its own and said, $20. I want to be honest with you, because there's no point telling a thing if you're going to lie partway through it. I did not say it to be a hero. I have never been a hero, and I am too old to start. I said it because of that wet-lipped man, and the thing I'd seen in her face, and 20 winters of my own silence, and a dead wife's voice in the back of my skull, and because the number was the exact amount I had folded in my breast pocket against my will, and some animal part of me decided that flour could wait, but this could not. The square went quiet. 20, the auctioneer said, recovering. I have 20 from the gentleman in the sir, are you certain? I'm certain. The wet-lipped man turned around to look at me. He took the measure of me, the buckskins gone shiny at the knees, the gray in my beard, the rifle, the smell of wood smoke and grease that you can't ever fully wash out of a man who lives the way I live, and he decided I wasn't worth $20 of his time, and he turned back around. That's the only reason it ended there. Not because I was brave, because I wasn't worth fighting. Sold, said the auctioneer fast, before I could think better of it. The whole thing took less time than it takes to tell. They made me sign a paper, a bill of sale like for livestock, and the wrongness of it sat in my throat the whole time the auctioneer's clerk scratched out the words. One female, name of M. Hutchins, sound of body. I signed it Elias Crane in a hand Martha would have been ashamed of, all cramped and angry, and I paid my $20 in coin, and just like that the law of that town said I owned a human being. I have done some things in my life I'm not proud of. That paper is near the top. She climbed down off the wagon when they told her to. She had a bundle, a small one, tied up in a gray shawl, everything she owned in the world. I'd come to learn, and it weighed less than my coffee pot. She stood in front of me in the mud, and she was taller than I'd expected, and thinner, and her wrists coming out of her sleeves were the wrists of someone who hadn't been fed enough for a long time, and still she looked at me with those creek-ice eyes and gave me nothing. I didn't know what to say. I have lived alone so long that words come hard to me now even when I want them. I stood there like a fool with the bill of sale crushed in my fist, and the whole town watching the cursed girl and the mountain hermit, the two things they'd rather not look at, finally finding each other and leaving. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I took the paper and I tore it, right there, slow so she could see it, into halves and then into quarters, and I let the wind take the pieces. That don't mean a thing now, I told her, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it. You hear me? You're not mine. Nobody's. You can come up the mountain with me where it's warm and there's food, or you can walk to the next town, and I won't follow you to find out which. But it's 11 miles and it's snowing, and I wouldn't recommend the second one. She looked at the torn paper, blowing across the square. She looked at me. And then, and I swear this is true, I have thought about it every day since. She picked up her little gray bundle, and she walked over to my mule, and she stood beside Biscuit and waited. Like the question had been answered the moment I asked it. Like there'd never been a real choice in it at all, which there hadn't, not for a woman with nothing and nowhere, and we both knew it, and the knowing of it shamed me more than the paper had. We left town with the light already going thin and gold behind the peaks. She didn't speak the whole way up. I hadn't expected her to, but I talked, which surprised me because I am not a man who talks. I think I was nervous. 11 miles is a long time to walk beside a stranger you have just bought and freed, and silence pressed on me, and so I told her things. I told her the mule's name was Biscuit, and that she was a foul-tempered creature who'd bite me as soon as look at me, but had never once put a foot wrong on the trail in 9 years. I told her where the trail got bad and to watch the ice. I told her the names of the peaks the way Martha used to ask me to, because Martha had loved that I knew them, the sister, the tooth, bald Annie, the widow. When I said the widow, I felt the woman beside me turn her head, and look at the mountain I was pointing to, the way you'd look at something that knew you. I shut up after that. The cold came down hard as we climbed, the way it does in those high passes, a cold with weight to it, a cold that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and lives there. I gave her my second coat without saying anything, just held it out, and she took it without saying anything, and that was the first thing that passed between us that wasn't a transaction. A coat, cold to warm, mine to hers. She pulled it around herself, and I noticed she smelled the collar of it. Just a little, the way an animal will, learning a thing before trusting it, and I pretended not to see. We reached the cabin after full dark. I live still in a single-room cabin my own father raised before me, logs gone silver-gray with age, chinked with mud and moss, set in a little flat clearing where the spring never froze and the wind broke against a shoulder of granite. It is not much. It was less than. One room, one window with real glass. I'd packed up the mountain a pane at a time, a stone hearth that drew well, a rope bed, a table, 2 stools, though I only ever needed one. Pelts everywhere, drying. The smell of smoke and tallow and animal and pine. A home if you were generous, a den if you were not. I lit the fire. I got it roaring, more than I needed because I wanted her warm and I didn't know how to say so. She stood just inside the door with her bundle clutched to her chest, looking at the one bed, and I saw the question go across her face, the old ugly question, the what does he want me for, and it landed in my gut like a kick. You take the bed, I said, too loud. I sleep by the fire most nights anyhow, my back. That last part was a lie, I told it easy. She didn't move. I'm not, I started, and then I didn't know how to finish it, the way a man doesn't, because saying the thing out loud makes the thing exist. So I just turned my back on her and busied myself with the fire and the coffee, giving her the room, letting her watch me not watch her, which is the only way I knew to tell her she was safe. When I finally turned around, she had set her bundle on the bed, and she was standing at my table, and she had found the heel of bread I'd left out from the morning, and she was eating it, not fast, not desperate, but careful in small bites, making it last, the way a person eats who has learned that the next meal is never promised. She caught me watching. I expected her to stop, to hide it, to shrink. She didn't. She held my eyes and she finished the bite she was on and she set the rest of the bread down on the table between us, half of it, deliberate, and she pushed it an inch toward me. An offering. From a woman who owned nothing to the man who just spent his winter money on her. Half a heel of stale bread, pushed across a table. I don't know what came over me. I'm an old man and I'd thought I was past being moved by anything. But my eyes stung there in the firelight and I had to turn back to the coffee so she wouldn't see, and I stood there with my back to her and my eyes wet and I thought, Elias, you damn fool, what have you done? What in God's name have you done? I didn't know yet. That was the mercy of it. That first night, I still thought the heaviest thing I'd carry up that mountain was already carried. I had no idea she'd brought something heavier in that little gray bundle than I could lift. She woke before me every morning, and every morning it frightened me half to death. I'd lived alone so long that my own body had become the only clock I trusted, the cold telling me the fire had died, the gray light at the window, the particular ache in my hip that meant snow. But that first week, I'd surface up out of sleep and there'd be a shape moving in the dark of my own cabin, and my hand would go for the rifle before my mind caught up, and every time my mind caught up there'd be the same small lurch in my chest. That's her. That's the woman. She's real. She's still here. She was always doing something. That was the thing about her I learned first, before I learned anything true. She could not be still. By the third morning she'd reorganized my whole cabin, not asking, not announcing, just doing, the way water finds the low places. My traps got cleaned and oiled and hung in an order that made sense. My herbs, which I'd had drying in a tangled mess from the rafters because Martha used to handle that, and I'd never learned it right, got sorted and bundled and labeled. Except she couldn't label them out loud, so she'd hold a bundle up and look at me with a question. and I'd say that's yarrow or that's the bitter one, for fever, and she'd nod once and file it away somewhere behind those creek ice eyes. I told myself she was just earning her keep, paying off a debt she didn't owe because she didn't know how not to. I told myself a lot of things that first week. The truth is, I think she was reading me. I didn't notice it then. You don't when someone's good at it. But looking back, I can see how she watched. How she'd find a reason to be near me when I worked, sorting pelts at the table while I cleaned the rifle, and how her eyes would go to my hands and my face, and I see it now, to my chest, every time I coughed. Because I was coughing, I should tell you that, I'd been coughing since the autumn. I told myself it was the smoke. A man who lives 40 years over a wood fire gets a cough. That's all. That's nothing. Every old trapper in those mountains rattled when he breathed. I told myself it was the cold air on the climb. I told myself a dozen comfortable things, and on the morning I first tasted the copper at the back of it, the morning before the auction, in fact, which is a thing I've turned over and over since, I had told myself the hardest lie of all, which is that I hadn't tasted anything. I am very good at not seeing what I don't want to see. It is the only real skill loneliness ever taught me. Let me tell you about the town story of her, since I learned it slow, and you might as well learn it faster. The Hutchins family had come up into that country maybe 6 years before, homesteaders, the father a hard man and a drinker by every account. They'd settled a poor claim in a draw below the pass and scratched at it and starved at it the way people did. And then one winter night the cabin burned. Burned to the foundation, with the whole family inside it, the father, the mother, 2 small children, and only the eldest daughter walked out of it alive. Walked 11 miles through the snow to town in the dark with her hair singed and her hands burned, and never said one word about how it happened. Not one word. Not to the men who rode up to look at the ashes, not to the preacher, not to anyone, not then and not in the 2 years after. And a town, you understand, cannot abide a silence. A silence is a space, and people fill a space with the worst thing they can imagine every time. So they decided she was cursed, that she'd lived because the devil protected his own, that a girl who survived what killed her whole family and then wouldn't say how must have something terrible inside her, and the not saying became the proof of it, round and round, the way these things go. They were half right, though they never knew which half. There was something terrible inside her. It just wasn't what they thought. The setback came in the 2nd week, and it came with the first true blizzard. The storm closed the pass in a single afternoon, the sky going the color of a fresh bruise, the wind coming up out of the north with a sound like the whole sky tearing, and then the snow, not falling but driven, sideways, so thick I couldn't see the granite shoulder 30 feet from my own door. I'd been out at the trap line, and I made it back half frozen with 2 rabbits and a marten, and by the time I got the door barred behind me, the world outside had gone white and roaring and gone. We were shut in. There's no other way to say it. When that kind of storm sets its teeth into the high country, it doesn't let go for days, sometimes a week, and you don't go out into it, not for anything, because men who go out into it are found in the spring. And it was in there, in the close-shut dark of it, the fire and the wind and the 2 of us, and nothing else in the whole white world, that I broke. I'd had a bad coughing fit, the worst yet. It doubled me over by the hearth. And it went on too long, and when it finally let me go, I made the mistake of looking at my own hand, which I'd had pressed to my mouth, and there in the firelight was the thing I'd been pretending not to see since autumn. Red, bright red, against my palm. I stared at it. I'm not a stupid man. I'd watched my own mother go this way, a long time ago and a long way from here, the cough and the wasting and the bright red blood, and I knew the name of it, and I knew it didn't let go any more than the blizzard did. And I'll tell you what I felt sitting there. I felt relieved. That's the shameful truth of it. After Martha, after the child we lost before her, after 20 years up that mountain talking to a mule, some tired part of me looked at the blood and thought, well, there it is. There's the end of the road and it's not so far off, and I won't have to be lonely on it much longer because I won't be anything at all. I closed my hand. I wiped it on my trousers. I didn't make a sound. But when I looked up, she was watching me. She was sitting on the far side of the fire with a pelt half scraped across her knees, and she had gone very still, the only time I ever saw her go still, and she was looking at my closed hand and then at my face, and her own face had changed. The ice was gone out of it. What was underneath was so naked and so stricken that I had to look away, because it was the face of someone who has just watched a thing she was afraid of come true. I didn't understand it then. I thought she was frightened of being alone again, of being a cursed woman shut up a mountain with a dying man. I would have understood that. I was wrong, of course. I was wrong about nearly everything in those weeks. But I didn't know yet how wrong, and I went asleep that night by the fire with my chest full of broken glass and my heart, God help me, something close to at peace, thinking the worst of it was a secret I'd managed to keep. The wind blew for 3 days. On the third night, deep in it, with the fire down to coals and the cold pressing its face against the window glass, I woke because something was different. It took me a moment to place it. The shape of her wasn't on the bed. She was sitting beside me on the floor by the hearth. She'd never come near me in sleep before. She kept her distance careful as a cat. And my first half-asleep thought was something stupid and old and male, and I'm ashamed of it. And then I saw her face in the coal light, and there was nothing in it but a terrible gathering, a person standing at the edge of a thing and deciding whether to step off. She had her hand pressed flat against the floorboards between us, as if to steady the whole spinning world. And she opened her mouth. I went still as stone. I did not breathe. 2 weeks of silence, 2 years of it, the whole town's worth of it, and I understood without being told that whatever was about to come out of her had not come out of her for a very long time, and that if I moved, if I spoke, if I so much as let her see how badly I wanted it, the moment would shatter and she would close back up like ice over a spring, and I would never get her again. So I lay still in the dark, an old dying man holding his breath, and I waited. And the cursed girl of Hutchins' draw, the silent one, the one I'd bought for $20 and a torn-up paper, looked at me with 2 years of swallowed words behind her teeth and said, in a voice rusty and low and more steady than I had any right to expect, "You're dying." It wasn't a question. And before I could answer, before I could even take the breath I'd been holding, she said the rest. The thing that turned the whole world over. The truth she'd carried up the mountain in that little gray bundle, heavier than anything I owned. "I know," she said, "because I'm the only one who can stop it, and I have to decide if I'm going to let you live." I have had a long time to think about what she meant by that, and I have come to believe it is the most honest thing anyone ever said to me. But that night I didn't understand it at all. That night I just lay there in the cold light, gut-punched, while the storm screamed at the window, and I said the only word I had. "What?" She drew her hand back from the floor. She folded both hands in her lap, and then, slowly, in that rusted voice that broke and steadied and broke again, a voice learning to be a voice again right there in front of me, she told me who she was. Her name was Margaret, not M. Hutchins, sound of body, Margaret. Her mother had called her Maggie. She had not heard the name spoken aloud in 2 years, and she said it like it belonged to a dead woman, which in a way it did. Her father, she said, had been a doctor once back east, before the drink took the practice, and the practice took the money, and the money took everything else and dragged them west looking for a place where no one knew what they'd been. But before the drink, he'd taught her. All of it. Because he'd had no sons and a quick daughter and too much pride to let good knowledge die with him. She'd read his books, anatomy, surgery, the pharmacopoeia, the lot, and she'd ridden with him on his calls since she was 9 years old, and she had set bones and stitched wounds and pulled bobbies and sat with the dying, and she knew, the way only someone trained to it knows, exactly what the blood on my hand meant. The wasting sickness. Consumption. The thing that ate the lungs. There's no curing it, I said. My voice came out wrong. I watched my mother. There's no curing it, she agreed. But there's living with it for a while, for longer than you'd think if you stop doing every single thing you do. And then, with the first flicker of something almost like the old town's fear of her, almost like a curse, you sleep on a stone floor over a smoke fire 11,000 feet up a mountain and you run a trap line in a blizzard. You're not dying of consumption, Elias. You're helping it. And I understood then the shape of what she'd said. I have to decide if I'm going to let you live. Because she could. That was the truth of it. She knew how to give me years I didn't think I had, the rest, the lower air, the right herbs, the broths, the 100 small mercies a trained hand could lay down between a man and his grave. She could do for me what no one in that valley could do. The cursed girl. The one they sold for $20 because she wouldn't talk. She'd let them believe it. She told me that too that night, the storm dying to a moan outside while the fire I'd built up between us threw its light on her face. She'd let the whole town believe she was simple and silent and cursed on purpose for 2 years because a woman who could not be useful could not be wanted, and a woman who could not be wanted was safe. The wet-lipped men, the widow who'd worked her like a mule, the boarders with their wandering hands. A silent, cursed girl is left alone. A young woman who can heal, they'd never have let her alone. They'd have used her up and traded her around and called it Christian charity. So she'd buried Margaret, the doctor's daughter, under the ashes of that burned cabin and let them have the Hutchins girl, the cursed one, because the curse was the only wall she had. And the fire, I asked, because I had to, your family. She was quiet a long time. The longest silence yet, but a different kind, not a wall now, just a wound. My father was drunk, she said finally. He knocked the lamp over. I got out. I tried, and her voice went and came back and went again. I tried to go back in for the little ones. My hands, she held them up. I'd seen the scars and thought them old burns from the cook fair. I couldn't, the roof. I couldn't get back in. That was all she ever told me about it. I never asked for more. There are silences a person earns, and that was one of them, and I have kept it for her ever since, except for now, except for you. And I think she would forgive me telling it because the telling is the only grave those children ever got marked. They called me cursed because I lived, she said, and I let them, because being cursed was easier than being the one who couldn't reach the door. I lay there and I looked at this woman the whole world had thrown away, who had walked out of a fire alive, and decided that surviving was a sin she'd spend her life paying for. And I thought about the half a heel of bread she'd pushed across my table the first night. And I understood that she had never once in 2 years stopped trying to go back into that burning cabin for someone she couldn't save. And here I was, dying, savable, pushed across her table by $20 in dumb luck. I have to decide if I'm going to let you live. Because to save me, she'd have to become Margaret again. She'd have to put down the curse and pick up the gift, and be a person who could be wanted. And risk the burning roof a second time. The roof being, this time, the simple, unbearable danger of caring whether a man lived or died and then having to watch. You don't owe me anything, I said. I tore up the paper. You can go in the spring. You don't have to spend yourself on a dying man to square a debt that was never. I know I don't owe you, she said, sharp, and it was the most alive I'd heard her. Don't you tell me what I owe. I've had a whole town tell me what I am for 2 years. I'm not asking your leave. And then she was quiet and the fire popped, and the wind had gone down to almost nothing, and somewhere out in the white dark, a tree cracked from the cold. I'm telling you it's hard, she said lower. What you're asking, it's not the herbs. The herbs are easy. The hard part is that I'd have to, she stopped. She looked at her ruined hands. I'd have to want you to live, and I haven't let myself want anything to live in a long time, because wanting something to live is how you end up standing outside a fire you can't get back into. I have thought about that sentence every day for the rest of my life, however long that turns out to be. I will not tell you she healed me, because that is not how the sickness works, and I have promised you the truth. I will tell you it is spring now, the late high spring that comes to those mountains in June with the snowmelt roaring in the creek and the columbine coming up purple in the rocks. I will tell you that the pass is open, that I am still here to walk down it, slower than I was, with a wet rattle in my chest that has not gone and will not go, but here, walking, the blood comes less. The herbs help, and the broth helps, and sleeping in a real bed she made me build helps, and not running the trap line in blizzards helps most of all. And the doctor's daughter who counts my breaths the way I once counted my supplies says I may have years yet if I behave, which she does not expect me to. I asked her that night when she'd told me everything, what she'd decided, whether she was going to let me live. She didn't answer me with words. She'd spent 2 years' worth of words already, and I think she was tired. She got up off the floor and she went to her little gray bundle, the one she'd carried up the mountain, the one I'd thought held all she owned. And she untied it. And inside, wrapped careful in oilcloth against the damp, were 3 things. A small case of surgeon's tools, blackened but kept sharp. A book of her father's, the spine broke and the pages soft with handling. And a packet of dried herbs, the good ones, the hard-to-find ones. The ones she'd carried out of that boarding house and guarded through 2 years of being called cursed and never once used, because using them meant being Margaret, and being Margaret meant wanting things to live. She set them on my table. She looked at me across the dying fire. And then she rolled up her sleeves over those scarred hands, the way her father must have taught her a lifetime ago, and she said, "Drink the broth first. It's cold by now. You let everything go cold." I drank the broth. The town still thinks she's dead, or gone, or cursed. Let them. They sold the only good thing in their whole valley for $20 and a clear conscience, and they will never know what they did. We go down for supplies, the 2 of us now, and people stare, and we let them stare, and we climb back up to the cabin where the spring never freezes, and she counts my breaths. And I count the columbine, and neither of us says much, because we are both people who learned a long time ago that words are dangerous and silence is safe. But the silence is different now. I want you to understand that, because it's the only thing I really have to give you. It used to be the silence of a man waiting to be done. Now it's the silence of 2 people who have decided, every single morning, to go back into the burning cabin one more time. She lost that gamble once. She knows she'll lose it again. So do I. I just don't think either of us is going to stand outside the door this time.